Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dina Zalm. I'm the healthcare organizer at Missouri Rural Crisis Center. It's wonderful to see some of your super familiar faces. I wanted to touch quickly on a couple of just Zoom best practices here. So if you are looking at a view of not very many people, if you want to change up who you're seeing when we're talking, if you look up in the top right corner of your screen, you can play around with how many folks are visible at once, switching from gallery to speaker view. And we ask that if you are not speaking, if you could stay muted. That just helps with background noise for us. The mute and video controls are down at the bottom. It is your decision if you're on video or not. We are happy to see your faces though after so long. And I think that's about it. Please use the chat to type your questions in. The chat is down at the bottom of your screen, kind of in the middle, and it will show up over the left. You can either chat to everybody, or you can chat just to some of the hosts. So I'm a host, Dina, Jamie, Blair, and Angela are also helping co-host kind of in the background with technology. So you can message me or Jamie, and we will make sure your questions get heard. I want to go ahead and introduce our wonderful guest and our expert on all things elections. She is currently our Boone County Clerk, previously worked with the Secretary of State's office and helped run the Elections Integrity Unit. She's incredibly hard to stump on anything voting and elections. So we are thrilled to have Brianna Lennon here with us. And I'll turn it over to her to kind of start talking through this graphic, because we looked at a lot of the questions you submitted as you were registering, and we think this will get us started in a good place. So take it away, Brianna.
All right, thanks for having me. And hopefully we'll get all your questions answered. If you do have any more, like Dina said, put it in the chat, she'll ask, and we'll make sure to get all of them taken care of. So I wanted to start, this graphic explains the new law that went into effect in the middle of June. So officially signed by Governor Parson the second week of June, it expanded the options for voting for 2020 only. So this applies to the August election and the November election, and then it's going to go away. So for absentee ballots, if you are interested in voting in-person absentee, so early, going into your clerk's office and voting there, or voting by mail, you can do absentee voting. There's an additional excuse now that if you are at risk for contracting or transmitting COVID-19, or if you have COVID-19 or had COVID-19, then you can select that option for absentee voting. You do not need to have your ballot notarized if that's the case. So you don't have to worry about taking it after you've gotten it in the mail to a notary and then sending it back. You can just send it straight back to your clerk's office. There's more information available on our website about what exactly that means, and for Boone County voters in particular, our office and our office number. But that is the new absentee voting excuse. The other excuses are still there. If you're going to be absent from the county, or you're incapacitated or confined due to an illness, all of those still apply. But the new excuse is there now and does not require a notary, and neither does the incapacitated or confined due to illness or physical disability. Those are the only two absentee options that do not require a notary. The other thing that the new law did was create a new type of ballot called a mail-in ballot. So a mail-in ballot doesn't require you to state an excuse at all. Anybody can use it. Everybody is eligible. But you can only apply for it in person or by filling out a form and mailing it in. So with absentee, if you've done it before and you're in Boone County, you probably know that we have an online portal if you want to vote absentee. We also take emails for requests for absentees. We can't do any of that for mail-in voting. It has to be in person or by mail, but the advantage is that you don't have to choose an excuse. But mail-in ballots all have to be notarized. So once we send you your mail-in ballot and you've cast your ballot and put it in the envelope, you do have to find a notary before you can mail it back to us. You also can't drop it off in our office. So we provide notary services. You can come into our office and we can notarize a mail-in ballot that you've received, but you'll still have to put it in a post office box or take it down the street to the actual post office for it to come back to us. We can't hand accept it, unfortunately, because it's considered a mail-in ballot. Either one that you want to do, if you want to take advantage of voting by mail or in person early using absentee, the deadline to apply for the mail is July 22nd. If you want to vote for the primary and you want it by mail, it has to be in by July 22nd, whether you want to do the absentee voting or the mail-in voting. If you want to come into our office and you're eligible for absentee voting, you can do that all the way up until the day before the election. So that part has no deadline, really. You can come in anytime, cast an absentee ballot, and get it all taken care of in our office. For the general election, I included that in the graphic too for people that are thinking ahead. Those ballots don't even go out until 6 weeks before the election. So even if you request a ballot right now, you're not going to get November's ballot until September. So don't be surprised if you do send it. We can accept it. We'll keep it on file and we'll enter it when the time comes that we have the ballots that are ready. But it's not going to happen until September. So don't be surprised if you're only asking for a November ballot that you haven't gotten one. The other thing to know about all of these mail-in options, absentee, mail-in voting, all of them have to be in our office by 7 p.m. on election night. So postmarks do not apply to the absentee process. We have to physically have your ballot. And so we go to the post office several times on election day to make sure that there's nothing left between the post office and our office. We want to make sure that we catch all of those. But if you're getting close to the deadline, if you've got your absentee ballot and you forgot to put it in the mail the Monday before the election, I would not risk putting it in the mail at that point. Take it straight to our office or your other clerk's office. You can call pretty much any county clerk's office and say, I want to drop my ballot off, but I don't want to be around anybody. And they can take curbside voting. So it's not like you have to come into our office. Just let us know in advance. We can come down and meet you outside and take your ballot and still make it as contact free as we can. So that's the new law.
Yeah, and I'm really glad we have you because I've got some follow-up questions from stuff that folks had previously asked that I think still relate to this that I want to follow up. And then I see we've got another question from Scott coming in the chat here. So for people who maybe are hearing this and thinking, oh my goodness, I requested a mail-in, but it sounds like maybe actually I wanted an absentee. Like what can they do if they have changed their mind, or if you request an absentee and you actually will be able to vote in person, or you feel comfortable doing that? Are people locked into those things that they applied for?
So it's definitely something that you want to ask your individual county clerk. I can tell you what Boone County does, and a lot of clerks have kind of come to a similar conclusion. So what you're signing under penalty of perjury is the ballot itself. So the ballot envelope, that's what we're checking when it comes back to our office and we're processing them. That's what we're looking at. Our strong preference is to have that match your absentee ballot application. So if you find out early enough, you can send us another application to kind of override the original one, and we'll keep that on file so that those two things match. But technically, if you do choose another reason, it does not invalidate your ballot. We might look into it a little more. We might give you a phone call and ask, why did you do it? But it's not going to invalidate anything as long as you fill it out as you're supposed to. If you picked absentee and then you decide to go mail-in and you didn't get it notarized, that's not going to count. So you have to do whatever it says on the envelope. Notaries required except for those two reasons for absentee. So don't pick one that doesn't need a notary, get it in the mail, and then say, oh, I want to pick something else. It requires a notary, and then you don't go get a notary. It doesn't work that way.
That seems fair. And then to that, an additional question that we had previously. So like if you apply, so in Boone County, at least we can apply online for our absentees, and you check a reason and you can't remember which of the two no notary reasons you checked, and then you're returning yours. the same thing applies, right? So like what is signed under the oath is the envelope, but it's best if it does match what you put in with your request.
Yes. And you can always call
Okay.
us. We have all of our applications are easily accessible. So you can always call us and ask us which one you picked, and we'll be able to tell you.
All right, fantastic. I want to go ahead and answer Scott's question here that he has asked in the chat. Is there a list that the public can access of people who've requested absentee ballots?
So there's a limited number of people that are able to request the absentee ballot list. Included in that list are people that have requested their own absentee ballot, campaigns, or a designee of the campaign. That's generally who we get requests from. The general public, if they have not requested an absentee ballot, the general public can't just request it. They can request a voter list, but not the actual absentee list.
All right. Nodding along, that's a good answer. Okay. So we had a previous question. I know you touched on it when you talked about the November election here, but people were specifically asking in their emails, if they apply for an absentee ballot, does it has to be for each individual election, correct? And then if they continue to apply, can they keep using the uses of incapacitated or the COVID specific one for November?
So this is another one that you're going to want to check with your own county on how they do it, because I know that everyone does it a little bit differently. Our applications do have a checkbox on the top, so you can choose multiple elections. Not everybody does that. Some like to color code their applications, and so they have individual applications. So you're going to have to check with each individual county clerk about whether they go over to the next election. If you're in Boone County, sample ballots are going out now. So if you haven't already asked for an absentee ballot and you want to, your sample ballot will be hitting the mail this week, and there's an application that's included in that on the blue sheet. So you'll see at the top that there's a checkbox for the August election and the November. You can choose both if you want to. Whichever excuse that you use now is what rolls over for the next one. So whatever you feel comfortable choosing now, that's what we will automatically default to, because so that people know kind of how this process works. So we've received close to 4,000 absentee requests. Let's say 3,000 of those requests were also for the November election. Those 3,000 requests sit in a physical queue, like we have a stack of papers. And once we can create the election in our system, which can't happen until we know who the winners of the August election are. So let's say we do that at the end of August. Then the end of August, we can start inputting all the information from those 3,000 applications that we know move over to the November election. We're going to put in exactly the same information. So the other important thing to know is if you move in between the time that you gave us your application and the next election, you need to tell us, because we will send the first round of absentee ballots out 6 weeks before the election, and it will go to whatever address it is that you applied for. So let us know if we need to update your address because you sent an application early. It is one of the reasons why when you talk to other counties, some counties want them separately because they don't want to send a ballot out to a voter that has moved, and then you find out when it bounces back to you that they've moved and the voter thinks that they've received that they've put in a valid request, and we think that they've put in a valid request, but there's been a change of address.
That's a really great point. And we had another question that came in advance of this about addresses specifically. So I will just segue right into that. So can absentee ballots be mailed to your non-residential addresses and out-of-state addresses for absentee requests?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you see the application always has put in your residential address because we're checking to make sure that you're a valid registered voter in our county. But there's also a place to say, where do I want my ballot mailed to? That's very common. That's how college students that are voting from somewhere else, fill it out too. So that's no problem. It doesn't raise any red flags or anything like that. That's what we expect to have happen, especially if you're choosing the excuse of being out of town on election day. You won't have an absentee ballot necessarily going to a Boone County address.
Absolutely. We have a question here in the chat. So are there requirements to prove that you are at risk of COVID? And those, because there's some very specific conditions for that COVID excuse.
No. There's no requirements to prove that. There's no requirements to prove whether you are incapacitated or confined due to illness. We take voters at their word. That's what we're required to do.
Yeah. I think that helps put a lot of people's fears at ease, even if they're not in Boone County. That's not something that clerks are putting their effort into, double back and checking on folks when they're trying to run these elections. Folks are interested in what sort of, two sort of things. So are there educational materials like cards or pamphlets? I would argue the graphic that we had up, that's available on the Clerk's website. And that's something that can be digitally shared, but they're thinking of educational materials, and or for the folks that aren't in Boone County, are there events that, you know, clerks or the Secretary of State are doing around trying to clear up some of this confusion around the new law and what people can do?
So for Boone County folks, like I said, the sample ballots that are going out always have instructional sheets, and I use that as an opportunity to share anything that I think might be confusing. So if you have not yet received it, I think they just hit the post office yesterday, so I wouldn't expect too many people to have gotten them today. But as you get them over the weekend and on Monday, there is explanatory information about the law and what has changed. It doesn't have this particular graphic in it because I only had so much space on one page to include everything that I needed to include. But it does include an explanation of absentee versus mail-in, just like our website does. We are getting it out on social media to the extent that we can. But the fact that, so we're somewhat unique in Boone County in that our sample ballots that we send out are a full-on envelope packet. So it's got a full-size ballot and an explanation page. Not every clerk has that. Not everybody sends out sample ballots. So it was easy for us to just include it in. A lot of other counties, and I don't want to say this as like an apologist for anybody that's not sending out information, but we are strapped for cash at the county level. And so while we've gotten some money that has filtered from the federal government through the Secretary of State's office, it has not been enough to do like mail-in education. It's primarily being used for things like those plexiglass screens for in-person voting, trying to increase the pay rate for poll workers so that we can retain people, because it's really hard to do that right now too. So mail-in things from our offices are most likely going to be pretty light. We had just already been doing sample ballots, so it was easy to marry those two things together. I know the Secretary of State has been doing he did do a couple press conferences, 2 or 3 press conferences on Wednesday, I think, in 3 different areas, and explained, I know he had a kind of like his own graphic that had what the difference for absentee voting is and what's available to people. And so there were a few articles that were written on that. One was in the Missourian. I know one was in, I think, a northern paper. I cannot quite remember. But they are doing that. And I would expect that as we get closer to the deadline, that July 22nd deadline, there's going to be more news articles about it. And so far, they have done a good job covering the differences between the 2 types of ballots and what's available.
Yeah, I hope we keep seeing more coming out. I wanted to just flag for folks. So Jamie from our office has just dropped into the chat. There's 2 links there. One is the Secretary of State's office, linking to the local election authorities, and one is the Missouri Clerks elections website with a directory for all the different clerks. So if you're not in Boone County and you want to look up who your local election folks are, those are two really good ways to go about finding it. And Angela is dropping in the graphic as a picture for folks if you want to pull what we had up on the screen when Brianna was first talking. I did want to talk about a little bit, can you tell folks, for people who are still wanting to vote in person, what some of the precautions we're taking at the different locations, and then just let us know if that's, is that county specific, or are some of these measures going to be, statewide?
Yeah, so statewide, the Secretary of State's office has provided every county with face masks with cloth face masks for judges, poll workers, and plastic shields if they prefer to wear that instead, as well as social distancing tape to mark on the floor every 6 feet, and hand sanitizer, a bunch of hand sanitizer. So they are providing that, so every county at least has that at their disposal if they're choosing to use it. Many of the other clerks have, in addition to our office, have bought plexiglass dividers that when you come into the polling place and you check in, there's a physical barrier between the poll worker and the judge so that you maintain distance, but also so that you're not, even in close contact, you're not actually interacting. We are also sending out gloves to the polls, although I don't know how, gloves are kind of a hit and miss thing, and I don't know how useful they are, but that's why we send out tons of hand sanitizer too. And we have posters up that tell people to practice good hand hygiene. We've trained our poll workers to do that as well. We are hiring, we're bringing in more youth election participants that we used for June, but they're high school students that are able to serve in a polling place, but not as a full poll worker. They can't touch ballots or things like that because they're not 18 years old yet, but we can use them for line management and helping to make sure that the polling place stays clean. So by and large, across the state, everyone is implementing some type of precaution. I haven't talked to anybody that's not doing anything. But the specifics for Boone County, we did it in June and it worked well. We're continuing to do it in August and plan to do it for November too.
I wanted to touch on, because I know some folks are used to having, their polling place that they go to all the time. For me personally, I vote at the public health department, but in June it was not open. I know that the polling locations have switched up a little bit. Is that a common thing that people should have on their radar, double checking where their polling places will be?
Yes, absolutely. So our challenges in Boone County we've run up against have been places that have just been unable to serve due to either their own concerns or they've had something else going on. The health department was a great example. They are going to serve as a polling place in August, but in June, when there was a lot of uncertainty, they just didn't have the space available to serve as a polling place and do all of the preparations and contact tracing and everything else. And the Columbia Library had the same problem. So I know that that is a fairly universal thing. A lot of counties have had to deal with trying to keep things as consistent as they can, but also make sure that they have enough polling locations. So check your polling place because it might not be available. The other thing that we're running into in quite a few places is that we're not able to find enough poll workers. And by law, we have to have at least 4 poll workers at each polling location. So that adds up when you're used to having, like for the August election, we're gonna have 45 locations that are open. With a minimum of 4, we can't safely and effectively staff a polling location with 4. We need more like 5 or 6. So if you multiply that by 45, it's just a lot of people that we need to recruit. And I know even in the smaller counties, Our poll workers are extremely dedicated and we are very fortunate to have them, but we also don't want to put them in harm's way. So everybody is trying their best to make sure they have enough poll workers to keep all of the polling locations open.
Yeah, I know that's a lot to juggle. I wanted to give folks a chance. Does anyone else have any pressing questions while we've got an expert on? And if you are on the phone or you can't use the chat feature, you're welcome to come off mute to ask them. Other than that, we'll give folks just a few minutes or a couple seconds here to ask. But I really appreciate it, Bree. Are there other things, you know, I know you've been talking to a lot of voters lately. Are there things you're thinking of that we haven't asked yet that you have frequently asked questions?
I mean, the biggest thing that I always tell people is make sure you're checking your information well in advance of the election. So our website for Boone County voters, we have a lookup tool, but so does the Secretary of State's office. And anybody can look up their information, their own information on the Secretary of State's website. Do it, make sure that you have information that's accurate and that your address is still the same as what you expected it to be. What will show up on the Secretary of State's website, because you have to put in your full name and your current address. If you've moved and you think that your address is updated on the voter roll and it doesn't find you in the system, it's because it has your old address. In ours, you're searching by name and date of birth, and so it'll just show your old address. So if you go on our website and look yourself up, and it's just on the main page there, so just go to our main vote.boonmo.org page, and you can tell right then, oh, that's not my address anymore, and you can complete a change of address on the website and get that taken care of. That's going to determine what ballot you get. It's going to determine what polling place you are going to. And if you do it in advance of election day, it means you have fewer snags to run into on election day. Because if you go to your old poll because you haven't updated it, then we're going to have to change your address and get you to your new poll, and that's not great.
So if you do know you've moved and you haven't completed that, the other fail-safe is you can always go and vote at the clerk's office, right, on election day? That's a universal?
Yes, so we do have a central poll that's at our office. We're still going to want you to change your address. It's just that we are physically here, and so we can do that. But yes, if you're at our central polling location, then you won't have to worry about going to another poll. But the more you can do in advance, the better. It just keeps things moving efficiently and smoothly on election day.
Absolutely. So we've got another question in here. How do we find out more about becoming poll workers, and how might high school students apply to serve as some of those student roles?
So we have on our website, we have a poll worker portal. So if you go on just to the main page, there's a little gray button down at the bottom that says become a poll worker. It's on the right hand side, and you can apply to be a poll worker, and it allows you to do the whole application. If you are a high school student that is interested, email us on the main page, pollworker@boonecountymo.org. Email us there, because we can't, the applying to be a poll worker is going to check you against our system, and if you're not a registered voter, it's not going to let you apply, and if you're 16, you're not going to be able to do it. So just email us directly. Becky Doran is our absentee, or is our poll worker coordinator, and she's fantastic. And so Becky will get back in touch with you about serving as a youth election participant in August.
And do other counties have that same youth elections program, or is that county specific?
It is an option that's available to everybody, but I do know that many counties are going to high school students and asking them if they're willing to serve in these elections. So it's always worth reaching out. Anytime that you want to volunteer for something, I guarantee you a clerk will not turn you away if you say, Hey, I was just wondering if you needed some more poll workers. They're going to give you an application faster than you probably knew was possible.
I would think that is definitely true. Well, I appreciate it so much. I see we're at kind of our 30-minute mark here. We're a few minutes over. Thank you, everybody, for submitting your questions, and thank you so much for your time, Brianna. We're very, very grateful. If you have more questions, you can follow up with our wonderful clerk. Do you want us to put your email in the chat?
Well, I saw it pop up, the clerk at Boone County Mo. Feel free to use that.
Angela's beat me to it.
That gets directly to me. Happy to answer questions.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate it so much. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.